that way. And so nature builds these all over the place. You would have seen it plenty of times, I'm sure, going out across your landscape. What happens to these little structures though? Through our production systems, these always get knocked down. So they've got to rebuild every time it rains, which means the process has to keep starting all over again. What we would talk about is we could put a contour in that mimics these, but they're a bit bigger than these to be able to manage our production system. So if our animals are walking on them, it doesn't matter. They can still work. Yep. Because these little systems, there'd be millions and millions of these forming all the time, but they always get knocked down. So these are the same thing, but on steeper country, you'll see these, they form like melon holes. How many people are in melon hole country? I'm sure you are, because you've got a few people in the melon hole country. So these melon holes naturally form, but in this case, they're forming out of, in the beginning, forming out of organic matter, and in time, if they're given the opportunity, they will create a semi-permanent little pond. So a bankless contour. It's interesting because I was talking to Mark there earlier, and this was the contour we built at the course that he did back in 2013. And so there's a gully in the foreground where you see the water flowing fast. And so the water can keep going past, but in underneath there's what we've called a bankless contour. That picks up some of that flow and directs it out on the contour to the ridge. Now, what can you see about in that contour? What story does the water tell you about how that contour was built? It's level, isn't it? So it was built level. So the water is moving level. Now, what's important about that? How many people have got structures like that on their place that you might call a contour bank? Many of you got those? Now, do they have a fall, do you know, from one end to the other? In other words, is one end higher than the other? If they do, which most of them probably would, they're called drains. They're not contours. They're different to these. So they're designed to move water off of the landscape, to get rid of it. Where a contour, if you go back to that one that nature built, was built level. And it was built to hold and slow water, not speed it up and send it another direction. So the key there, and the difference between the two, is in a drain, the water moves at the base, across the ground. Now, I want to ask you, when water moves across the ground and maybe it's not well vegetated, what happens? What's the end result? Erosion, isn't it? So it erodes. When you build a bank that's level, the bottom water can't move. Because it's blocked because you've built it level, which means the water that moves is the water that moves over the top of the water that covers the ground. So the water is now doing the work of managing erosion. It's not down to plants, it's not down to the bank, it's not down to any of that. It's all managed by water, which is how the landscape works. This is just a shot to give you an idea of a level contour, because a lot of people can't visualise it, and when they look at that, they think that contour is going uphill. But it's not. It's because the land continues to fall away, but the contour stays level, which means it's gradually crawling higher and higher up the landscape. So if you think about it, this bottom area where the bit of green is a floodplain, and then we move up into the slopes where the contour is up into. So the water that would have once flowed down across that floodplain, some of that water carrying nutrients is now moved up to the slope. So now it has the ability to affect the land on the side of the hill. So you're now getting water and nutrients moving from one spot to add more fertility, more water to create more growth in an area that would never have received that water. Does that make sense? Just waiting for this to start. There we go. So this is at PA's property down at near Goulburn in New South Wales. He put in these little contours, and I know a lot of you guys in Queensland probably think these things are too small, but they don't need to be built big. Just like the ones that nature builds, they just need to be big enough to manage our production systems. So our animals, if our animals are going to walk on them. So that little contour in a very short time went from being bare earth to a wetland. Now, because he worked with that and he added water to it with a pump, like he talked about where he pumps water back from the low ground, it turned to a wetland very quickly. You're only going to work on rain events. So you're going to be driven by how many rain events you have in a year as to how quickly that system may become a wetland. And maybe it could take years before it does. That doesn't matter. The point is that the system is set up that it can start to do that. So people ask about why would you bother doing contouring and what's the result? Well, in this shot you can see this is on the coast of Queensland. You can see where the contour runs along and you can see the extra growth that's on the downside of that contour. So just holding that water in there for a little bit longer allows that to seep down to feed the country below. Anybody going out on the bus tours this afternoon to Les's place where we're going to go to, you will see that. Even though the grass is dry, you can see how much more bulk there is in and around where the water is being managed. So slowing the flow, these are structures that we tend to keep away from as much as possible, but structures in streams. This is a project that PA did at a place called Maloon Creek in New South Wales, and you can see the key difference. So you've got an eroded creek system, this was a creek, and then on the right-hand side you can see after the works. What's the key difference between those two shots? What do you see is the main thing that stands out to you? How much green there is. The thing that we talk about is life starts from a water body and moves out. So you think about when all life started on Earth, where did it come from? What's the biggest pond we've got? The ocean. All life came from the ocean and moved onto the land. So you're recreating that every time you create these water bodies around your landscapes. You're starting that process again. So let all plants grow. So this is a good shot here of a whole heap of thistles. A lot of people would have probably gone in and sprayed those thistles out or done something to get rid of them very early on. But you think about the biomass that those plants are creating and what they're doing. What is it indicating to you was the problem in that landscape for those to be there? Why did they turn up? That's the key, understanding that and then realise that the plants will either fix that for you or you can do something to speed up the process if you don't want those plants there. Same with these guys. These ones are Nagura burrs. You'd be familiar with those. The last ones you're probably not familiar with, but Nagura burr, I bet you're familiar with those. Anybody's on floodplain systems, you would see those after every flood event. Where do they grow? They grow in all the deposition, don't they? They grow in all the organic matter that came down in the last flood. So what are they doing? They're breaking down that nutrient into a form that's more available. What do they do to you, apart from annoy you, that all the burrs are now in the cattle's tails and their manes? And then they transport those seeds all over the place and you worry that they're going to grow all over the place. But of course they don't, do they? Even if the seeds end up everywhere, they still grow in the same places because they're playing a role. So in this case, I actually harvested these materials. I cut them and baled them. Pretty crazy, wasn't it? Cut them and baled them off the floodplain area and I transported those up to the top. So I got fertility back up on that hill that was never there before, not in that form. So those plants are playing a role of moving that fertility around. These ones here, sticky beaks, farmers' friends, cobbler's pegs. You've seen those before, I'm sure. Yep. Probably hate those because you get black things stuck in your clothes every time you walk through them. But again, they grow a huge amount of biomass and they're edible to your animals as well. So there's a double side to them. They're good plants. In this particular shot here, it's showing the multiple species of plants. Believe it or not, that was cobbler's pegs this tall before the cattle went in there. Guess what they ate first? The cobbler's pegs. Why? Don't know, you have to ask the cattle. They had a choice. They could have eaten grass or they could have eaten the cobbler's pegs. Well, they chose to eat the cobbler's pegs first because those plants had access to nutrients that the grasses didn't for whatever reason. And the animals know those plants are what they needed for their health, so they ate them first and then moved on to the other plants. So having all of these different plants in your system is good.
All around the world, traditional wisdom has it that forests bring the rain. Scientists have scoffed at this notion for a while. Forests grow where there's ample precipitation, but they do not cause that precipitation.